Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Bob Thomas, Superintendent of Knox County Schools, and appreciate you joining us this afternoon for our community budget meeting. We're also live streaming the meeting, so again, welcome folks that may be watching the live stream of the meeting as well. So tonight we're going to talk about our budget recommendation to the board. The board will meet next week on the 27th of April to either approve or to amend or adjust our general purpose budget, and also hopefully approve our capital improvement plan budget and our child nutrition budget. But tonight we'll focus mainly on the general purpose budget. So again, thank you for being here, and let me just kind of give you just a little bit of idea how we put this together. Of course, we have a strategic plan. Our board has a strategic plan that was developed a few years ago, and I think we're maybe in the third year of that plan. So the budget's formulated around the strategic plan. Also, we sent a survey out back in the fall, and a budget survey. That was the first time that we've done that, and the responses, I think there were over 4,500 responses to our budget survey. So again, appreciate all the folks that responded to the survey, because again, we use that survey to help draft this budget that we'll be recommending to the board. So again, strategic plan, community input, very important in budget development. So tonight I have with me on my right here is Mr. Ron McPherson. Ron is Chief Financial Officer and Assistant Superintendent, and to my left, Joe Snyder. Joe is our Budget Director, and then Joni Joyce, our Budget Analyst, here with us, and we'll be, Joe is going to present and Joni will present, and we'll also take questions at the end. If you have some questions that you want to ask us, we'll all try to be involved in that, depending on who is best in terms of answering a particular question. So just to give you a few highlights about what we will be recommending to the board. Of course, there's the revenue that comes primarily from the state, from the local, and then other sources. Joe will be talking about the revenue, but it looks right now, the revenue projections look to be the best that they've ever been in terms of at least as long as I've been in a school district. So for that long history, it looks like revenue projections might be the best we've seen in some time, which is really, really good. So the investments that we will be talking about and recommending to the board in terms of employee recruitment and retention, this budget recommendation would include a 4% raise for all staff, for certified and classified staff. So this will be the third time, I think, within a 4-year time frame where we've given a 4% salary increase to our certified and classified employees. In addition to the 4% raise, also those employees that are eligible for a step will receive a step increase. So again, depending on where you are on the salary schedule, if you're topped out, then 4% would be what you would get. But if you're progressing up the salary schedule and you're eligible for a step, then you would receive the step on top of the 4%. Our least compensated employees, which includes our custodial staff, our educational assistants, and our school clerical staff, will once again receive an 8% increase. Again, those are the least compensated employees. Last year received an 8% raise, so for this next year we would be recommending an 8% raise once again, so for the second consecutive year there. And then something a little bit new with this budget is for our classified employees who now currently join the county pension plan. If this budget is approved, what our classified employees would be eligible to do is to join the Tennessee Consolidated Retirement System Plan, which is what our certified employees are on. And again, new employees, if this is approved, new employees would be required to join that plan. It's a combination deferred compensation and defined benefit plan, which should help with recruiting and retention a little bit. If you're an employee and on the county plan, you would have the option to join that plan. Again, we'll be talking provided the budget passes, we'll be talking with employees more about that as we progress through the years, to whether or not they want to stay where they are or to move to this plan. Once again, we're committed to staffing at the school level. We've seen our enrollment decline over the last 3 years. due to COVID and whatever other reasons that are out there. But our enrollment is decreased. We probably are somewhere down around 1,500 students, I guess, in terms of where we were a couple of years ago. But what we are recommending to the board once again is no cuts to school staff. So our staffing, even though our enrollment is declining a little bit, we're maintaining staffing levels at the same rate that they were for this current year. So once again, for the second year in a row, maintain our staffing levels. What does that do? That helps us with maintain teacher-pupil ratios. On the survey and also with the strategic plan, we talk about compensating, recruiting, retaining our employees. We talk about teacher-pupil ratios and maintaining those. So really proud of the fact that we're able to once again to recommend to the board that we continue with the staffing level that we are right now. In addition to that, we have some schools that are growing in enrollment, so we're adding positions. So in the past, sometimes those positions have been capped. Maybe a school would earn 3 positions and we could only afford to do 1 position. Well, this year, if your enrollment has grown, then we're staffing accordingly to our staffing formula, which is adding positions to schools with growing enrollment. So again, really proud of that, and that's going to help our students to rebound from the learning disruptions that we've had over the couple of years. And I know it's been stressful for our teachers, our administrators, it's been stressful for all of us, our parents, our families with COVID. Again, what we wanted to do is make sure we maintain those staffing levels so that we can provide all the help we possibly can to our schools and to our families. And this year is brand new, a virtual school. We have a virtual elementary school, middle school, and high school. That was in place this year. The budget for the coming year will still maintain that enrollment option for students. So again, the virtual schools will be an option for our families at all 3 levels, elementary, middle, and high school. And then as we did this current year, we are making a significant investment in our special needs students. There in this budget, we're adding some critical needs staff, special education teachers, special education assistants, speech and psychology professionals, and also nurses. So this is going to help us with our growing caseload with our special needs students. And in addition to that, the Welcome Center that we opened a few years ago, we're increasing our staff at the Welcome Center for our limited non-English speaking and limited English speaking families. So to serve them better, we're adding some positions at the Welcome Center. All of these investments would be 42 new positions in the recommended budget. So we're also moving some positions out of federal funds into our general purpose budget, roughly 20 positions there. But the categories that I mentioned, 42 new positions. And then an additional investment in our students' social and emotional health needs. This year, we launched, last year we added some counselors and social workers. What we plan to recommend to the board this year, and it's a multi-year plan to try to get the ratios of social workers and counselors up to what the national standard is. So we're looking at adding 8 new social workers and 7, that would be at the high school level, and then 7 counselors at the elementary level. So again, once again, helping our schools with issues that our students are having with social emotional needs. And then a chronic absenteeism facilitator. That person will work. Our chronic absenteeism rate is about 16.6%, which is higher actually than the state level in terms of chronic absenteeism. So we want to make sure that we try to reach students and families who are chronically absent from school and get them in school. If we want to increase student achievement and eliminate our disparities and build a positive culture, we need to make sure that we try to do everything we possibly can to get all of our students in school and on a regular basis. So, and additionally, a whole child facilitator, a whole child liaison, and behavioral facilitators will be added this year to address the social emotional needs. So those are primarily the highlights with what we're looking at right now. Let me say too, the budget is is in a draft stage right now. It's a work in progress. The budget will not be approved until the board meets next week, and they could possibly amend the budget, adjust the budget, but once it's approved by our Board of Education, then it's submitted to Mayor Jacobs, and Mayor Jacobs will take our budget and also the county budget, and then at some point here in probably early May, present a budget to County Commission, and once County Commission approves the budget, then we're off and running for this next fiscal year, which would be 2023. So again, those are the highlights. At this point in time, I will turn it over to Joe and to Joni and let them take you through the presentation. So once again, thank you for being here, and if you're watching live stream, appreciate you joining us. If you're watching a recording, thank you for that as well. So Joe, at this time, if you would, take over. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. And just before I get started, I want to thank Mr. Thomas and Mr. McPherson, as well as other staff here, senior staff, who've helped us navigate the process and put the budget together. And also to Ms. Harrington's team for setting up the room and getting everything ready for this evening. And more importantly, to the community that's here and those of you that are watching online, we do appreciate, as Mr. Thomas said, the survey that we did in the fall. We appreciate your feedback on that, and that did help guide the process. So just kind of an overview, and we can go ahead and go to the next slide. An overview of what we're going to talk about. Mr. Thomas hit on several of the highlights. I'm going to talk a little bit about some revenue details, and then also some district-wide type initiatives that he touched on. And then Joni's going to talk about some of the departmental level initiatives, as well as some fixed increases. Next slide, please. And so just as a way to step into it, I do want to touch base here about the general purpose budget. I know in some meetings we've had in the past, there's some confusion about the district does have many budgets. And so kind of the first thing I want to do is make sure we're talking about. This is a general purpose, which is in a current year $542 million. But we also have some federal budgets, IDEA, special ed, food service, title budgets, and also our capital budget, which is used to build and maintain our physical structures. So stepping into the general purpose budget, I just want to give you a 4-year look at kind of where we have been and where we're going. If you look at fiscal year 20, the budget was around $507 million. And you notice a slight decrease there, a dip from fiscal year 20 to 21, which is a result of the COVID year. And based on that year, we reduced our expenditure budget by a few million. And then if you look at the current year, which is fiscal year 22, and projection for next year, you can see considerable growth in those two budgets. And it's related to what Mr. Thomas talked about, which is significant revenue increases. I would just put that into perspective. The average year-to-year increase we typically see in the school's budget is anywhere from 3 to 4%. And if you look at the last couple of years, the current year and projected next year, we saw 7.6% growth in the expenditure budget this year over last year, and we're looking at about 9.1% going into next year. Next slide. So the next few slides, we look at the details of the revenue. And if you're familiar with the general purpose budget or have heard us talk about it in the past, you know there are 3 main components of the revenue. First is the state, and then the local revenue, and then also what we consider just some other minor revenue sources. So I want to talk here briefly about the state revenue. Typical year-to-year growth is about 4%. You see the number below that is in red, which is 2%. That's what we're projecting for next year. And there's a couple of contributing factors to the state revenue. The first one is determined by how much money the governor puts into the state's budget, which is released in June. And then the second one is determined by how many students we are projecting for the school system to have next year. And so based on those two factors, and we circled the number of students because that is a contributing factor to the fact that our percentage of growth here is not as high as normal. And you go back to what Mr. Thomas said about the number of students, we still haven't yet to recover to the number of students we had prior to the pandemic. So based on that, our year-to-year growth at the state level has been reduced, and we're projecting about $4.5 million of growth year-to-year between this year and next year. I do want to say just a quick word here about those of you that have kept up with the state They are, of course, in conversations about changing how they allocate money to districts. New models, TISA, which is still in legislature. We don't know all the details of that yet. Of course, once we know those, we'll share out those details. Next slide. And so the local revenue, well, the state revenue, before I move on, the state revenue comprises about 45% of our total general purpose revenue. And then the local revenue, the two we'll talk about here combined are about 53%. The local option sales tax, so to put that into perspective, the state mandates 7.5% sales tax. Local municipalities have the option of increasing that up to 2.75%. Knox County has a 2.25% local option sales tax, and the school district by charter receives 72% of any of that local option sales tax money collected. Typical year growth is like the other percentages we've seen, is about 4% in that number. You see the green number below that, 25%, that's significant growth. And I think in total, when you add up our total projected revenues for next year, we're looking at that number, these two numbers together drive about 92% of our projected growth in revenue for next year. It is a bit misleading because that's a budget to budget number. And I say that because if you look back at our current year budget for sales taxes, we were budgeting about $177 million. But what we've realized as this year has played out is we've actually collected a great deal more than that. So strong sales tax growth has continued. And so when you look at it, where we're projecting to finish this year is around $215 million in collections, and we're budgeting at this point about $220 million. So actuals that we're going to close at and what we're projecting to budget next year, the growth there is really only about 2%. And the contributing factors to sales tax, one is the COVID year impact, and by that I mean if you go back a couple of years when COVID hit, we were in the middle of the budget build, and we significantly reduced what we were budgeting for sales tax based on what economists were telling us. And then what happened, in fact, was the opposite. Sales tax growth really was strong post-COVID as well. And then pivoting to property tax, the typical year-to-year growth there is 1%. It's much more stable just by the nature of it. And the projected change there we have for next year is 2%. That's primarily driven by new builds, new subdivisions, new housing, which we know has been strong in the area. It is not related to your property tax is not going to go up based on new assessments, which of course are going out right now. So I always make sure to point that out here because some people get anxious about that. So as you know, when assessments are done, reassessments are done, the county goes back and readjusts the property tax rate afterwards to maintain that same level. So when you add those two numbers together, again, that's about 53% of our projected growth for next year. And then next slide, please. The other revenue is a much smaller component. It typically comprises about 2% of our revenue growth. And a couple items I do want to point out here that changed from this year to next year. Our federal programs that I mentioned earlier, IDEA, Title, and in this case, school nutrition, we can charge them indirect cost for managing the fees or the funds that are associated with those programs. And due to the nature of the school nutrition reserve fund, when we entered this current fiscal year, we took the $1.5 million we typically charge them out of the budget, but the reserves have sufficiently recovered, and now we're putting that back into our budgeted revenue. And so that's the $1.5 million figure you see there in green. And then the local grants beneath that, you see a decrease of $2.3 million. And so that is a decrease in revenue, and I'll say this before I tell you what they are. We are not decreasing the related expenditures. Those have been absorbed into the general purpose budget, and superintendent feels strongly about the necessity of those two programs. Those are the kindergarten intervention and the literacy initiative. Typically, the mayor's budget transfers those funds to us. Their budget's much more reliant on property taxes, which, as we said a minute ago, are much more stable and flat. So they're not realizing the strong growth we are. So they've asked us if they could suspend those for the coming year, and we did that. But again, we're keeping those related expenditures in our budget. So when you add the three that we just talked about, the state revenues, the local, and the other up, you're getting about a $49.5 million increase to our current year budget. which is, I think Mr. Thomas said this earlier, it's over 9% growth, which is significant growth for the school district. Next slide, please. So I want to pivot here, hit a couple of slides about kind of district-wide level initiatives, and then Joni's going to talk about department level and fixed increases. So Mr. Thomas alluded to this as well. There are really three building blocks that drive the creation of the budget, and it starts with the strategic plan that the superintendent, board, and community create, and did so a few years ago. And then the second one would be community input outside of the strategic plan. This year, it was driven by the budget survey back in the fall. And then we take the input gathered from that, including the departmental meetings that Joni will mention, and take those to the superintendent and also discuss those individually with the board, and that's what creates the final proposed budget. And so back to the strategic plan and the budget survey from the fall. By and large, the most significant response we saw when we were asking the community, what do you value? And we also asked internal stakeholders as well, what do you value most in our current year budget as well as future budgets? And the common theme we saw was the higher recruiting and retention of quality employees and quality teachers, as well as teacher pay and benefits. And so just talking through quickly, Mr. Thomas hit on these as well, but I want to talk through them again just to point out how they do tie back to the survey and as well as the strategic plan. Better compensating your employees is directly correlated to creating a positive culture. So we are in this budget proposing to give all eligible personnel a step increase on their salary schedule. And then in addition to that, both categories, certified and classified salary schedules, all base salary schedules will be increased by 4%. And then we're also, for the second year in 3 years, targeting our lowest wage salary schedules. And this is the second year we will give an 8% increase to those. Had conversations about how to tackle that. 8%, is that enough? Is it not enough? And I think we all said that's a step in the right direction. And after this, once this year gets started, let's do a broader survey of our salary schedules and see, before we keep Band-Aiding one-offs, let's see if we can fix the salary schedule in total. And so that makes up our educational assistants, custodians, and our school clerical positions that will have an 8% raise in the proposed budget. In addition to that, another area that's very important is student transportation, of course, because we're transporting our children every day. There is an increase in the budget for the amount of money of course, we don't own our school buses. We pay bus contractors for that. We're increasing the bus contracts, which in turn typically leads to an increase in the bus driver's wage. And then pivoting a bit to talk about benefits. Obviously, health insurance is the largest benefit the district provides in terms of dollars paid for that from the district's side. And this year, the state is projecting a 6% increase in premiums. And so if you remember, current fiscal year, after the budget was approved, the board and Mr. Thomas both agreed that the district would pick up. I think this year there was a 3% increase heading into this year. The board and Mr. Thomas agreed to pick up the entire portion of that increase, which increased the district's employer side of that equation. And so just based on this 6% increase, the district is now covering more, and we're also covering more employees. And based on those dynamics there, we're looking at having to increase our medical insurance costs by about $3 million for next year. That's offset a bit by, Mr. Thomas mentioned our Tennessee Consolidated Retirement System, which is historically it's been our retirement for our certified personnel, our teachers. And the legacy plan is the plan that was closed in 2014, which is the true pension plan. But based on just the actuary determined contribution that they look at each year, the district's responsibility for that plan will be reduced from 10.3% to 8.69%, which results in about $2.3 million in savings. So that helps offset the amount I just talked about for health insurance. But then the second part of that, which we're really excited about, is the TRS Hybrid. So in 2014, after July, I believe they started the TRS Hybrid, which is a combination of a defined contribution and a defined benefit, which is a traditional pension plan. And to this point, that's only been offered to our certified personnel. But Mr. Thomas and the executive team looked at that and would like to extend the option for those existing classified employees to also participate in that. And they'll, like he said, they'll have the opportunity based on, where they are in the current plan and with some education and information meetings there to transfer to the hybrid plan. And then any new classified employee, if the budget is adopted as is, would be put into the TRS hybrid plan, which is a better benefit long-term for all employees. Next slide. So when you add those up that we just looked at, it was a little bit over $25 million of an investment. So a little bit over half of what we talked about in the total investment goes into those items. And then the last part I want to talk about here is the staffing part. And again, Mr. Thomas alluded to some of these positions, but tying these back to the survey and to the strategic plan, I think it's easy to say these touch all three of the primary goals that drive the strategic plan. I think any teacher in a classroom would argue that smaller teacher classroom sizes helps create a positive culture there. Also helps eliminate disparities and increase achievement. And so the nature of the positions added, there are really three areas here. So after the budget's approved every year in the fall, we do our best to anticipate how many students are going to show up, but sometimes they show up in different pockets or different areas than we anticipated. And so when we look at that, we usually have to add some teachers after the budget. So that's the top bullet there, which is the recurring unanticipated positions. And then the second part of that, if you remember in the current year, we created the virtual programs at elementary, middle, and high schools. And just due to the fact that those were made actual schools by the state, we were required to fund and staff those the same way we do our brick and mortar schools. So there's a burden to the general purpose budget that we had to absorb there as well. And the third one speaks directly to the projected enrollment growth at schools. So every year in the spring we look at the projections for the upcoming school year and those areas where we anticipate growth based on ratios and conversations with principals and staff. We typically add additional teachers, school administrators, or school counselors. And typically what we try to do to help offset any significant growth there, significant adds to the budget is cap any gains. If a school is slated to gain 4 positions, we may say let's cap that at 2 and make sure that plays out in the fall. But to Mr. Thomas's point, this year the recommendation was if it looks like it's going to earn, let's go ahead and add those now. So that is in this budget as well. And if a school was slated to lose positions based on the projected enrollment, we did not reduce those. Those are still in the budget, which of course goes back to what he's saying about this is going to only help to create a more generous student-teacher ratio. The staffing part of that's about $8.75 million. When you add that to the slide before that, you're getting about $34.2 million of total investment just on those items. That's about 70% of the total investment the district is proposing to make for fiscal year 23. So I think Joni's up next, so she's going to talk about some departmental level initiatives.
Okay, so the next, I'm going to talk you through some of what we consider our department level increases in expenditures. And so this first slide focuses in on curriculum instruction and student support services and the increases that they requested. So every year as we begin our budget build process, Joe and I meet with every person in the district that has a budget account. And we work through their staffing with them and anything that they need, what we consider below the line expenses, which are contracted services, supplies and materials, and then other items, professional development, things like that. And we compile those and we look at the strategic plan as well as the input that we've received, and we put that list before the superintendent and the Board of Ed to kind of review and see what things we can afford to add to the budget and keep as our initiatives. So Mr. Thomas talked about the first two, which are the largest parts of this slide, the 42 new positions for special ed and support areas. Those are kind of a combination of better meeting the needs of our special ed students, as well as potentially some new programs in there. He mentioned the significant investment in our Welcome Center. So since that opened a few years ago, the number of students that they're serving for non and limited English-speaking families has just grown. And so they need some more interpreters and people to enroll and orient the families into the district. And so we felt like that was a very worthwhile investment to help those children and families. And then absorbing some positions from our federal budget and moving those into general purpose so that they're more stable, and will continue to be, we'll be able to continue to fund those. The second bullet deals with the part that Mr. Thomas talked about is the investment in our social and emotional health of our students and increasing the number of social workers and school counselors, and then the positions that he mentioned that will work system-wide to really look at the whole child and better coordinate the services that those kids need within our district. So if you look at those first two bullets, the special ed and student support investment, that's about $3 million additional. And the school culture and mental health, that's about 1.7. So you can see that makes up a good part of that $6 million total. Then you move down to the third bullet, it talks about the night alternative program. And basically what that is for students who have been suspended for multiple days from their school, and we can't get them immediately into one of our day alternative programs. It helps them continue with their education at night, working with either online or with people helping them continue their education so that they stay on track and don't fall too far behind. The next two bullets deal more with what we consider our content areas. So you're talking about like social studies, science, the fine arts, and the requests we received for them. And so we're making there's about 4.8 new positions in that area. One of them is specifically for music and performing arts specialists. So that's basically a system-wide position to work in our district with all the music and performing arts teachers to better coordinate the things that we can offer to our students. That was actually a position during the COVID year budget that we actually had cut and was absorbed in some of the other fine arts. And so we feel like that's an important area to continue and to bring back as an investment. We also have programmed in some money to look at the band director and assistant band director supplements, kind of be more uniform across the school district so that every school has at least a minimum and then kind of work from there. A new library and media services specialist will work with, there's about 7 schools which are kind of like our special day schools that are a little bit underserved for librarian services. So this position will work and coordinate with those schools as well as deal with distribution of textbooks and things like that and make sure that that goes very smoothly. Science, we are absorbing the complete position that is our STEM coach. So currently it's split funded between a grant that's actually going away in a year or so and general purpose, and we want to make sure we can keep that. So we're moving that into general purpose so it's in more solid funding. And the last two deals more with what I consider more school level. So the state has designations for different schools that need additional resources. So we're adding a position for one of our ATSI schools. And then we're starting the process to staff our new Northwest Elementary School. So for the beginning, this next school year, we will have a principal in place to start working to build the community, reach out to the community, start building the team and making some decisions about the new school. And then halfway through the year, we will hire an assistant principal for that school so they can get started on hiring and getting all the personnel that they need in their school. And then the last bullet deals with, again, the content areas. So any increases that were requested for materials and supplies are things that will actually end up in the school classroom, either for instruction for use by teachers or for educational materials that will be used by students in their education. We did find a common theme amongst a lot of our departments is just software increases. So that seemed to be something that we saw in a lot of different areas. So that's programming in any software increases. So again, that's about $6 million investment in curriculum and student support services. And so moving on to the next slide, this one deals with what we look at every year. So of course the district has certain expenses that are fixed and that those are things that we just we have to program the increases into the budget. So the first one and the largest one out of that is our debt service burden that we actually pay for in the general purpose budget. So that was one of the expenses that was growing. The trustees commission kind of manages our money, and so when our revenue increases, that means we have to increase the amount of money that we pay to the trustee commission, kind of like our banker. And then Emerald, we are experiencing a small increase for them, and that is not because their ADM is growing. It's basically as our per pupil expenditure increases within our district, then so the pass-through money that we are required to give to the charter school also increases. And then we always look for savings. I mean, we're not always just about increasing our expenditures. So every year we really go thoroughly through line items and try to figure out things that we can save on, sometimes working with the county, and sometimes just within internal departments. But we are realizing some savings with district level insurances like workers' comp. We switched banks, so we were able to realize some savings for bank costs, and then our space costs, since we're no longer in the AJ building and we're now currently over here. So that's $6.5 million in our fixed discretionary increases at the district level. And then moving on to our last slide, this is what we consider the administration and operations area, and that's $2.7 million. That's less than 1% of our projected increase. So the largest one of that is a new investment in school security. So you can see we're adding 22 new positions. 20 of those will actually be school resource officers. One is a sergeant position, and then one is a currently existing position that we fund through a grant that we're moving into our general purpose budget, as well as some increases to security software and supplies for the new position. So that's about a $1.3 million investment in school security. The next one is, I know Joe and I think Mr. Thomas also mentioned to you that the state is looking at how they're going to change funding the schools. So we've actually programmed into the budget 10 new positions for school support and operations. So if we move more towards a student-centered budget model where we'll actually be working with principals and they will have a little bit more autonomy in their school level staff, we're going to have to build in some capacity for training and working with them to stay within certain parameters for their staffing. So we did work in 10 new positions for that. 5 new positions spread out over 3 departments, the technology department to handle the one-to-one initiative, as well as just basic school technology and district level technology needs. A position for maintenance and operations, it's an energy educator, and then an asset management person. And then 1 new position in public affairs, as well as a new student communication software and some coupon book upgrades so that the schools can actually realize the entire amount of the coupon book sales. So that was a $2.7 million additional investment in that area. So that's kind of a general picture of the general purpose budget, kind of showing you some of the new initiatives and expenditures that we wanted to share with you. And just at this point, we wanted to open up if you had any questions. We'll be happy to answer as many questions as you have and open up the floor to you guys.
Thanks, Joni. I do want to say before I forget, those of you watching and those of you here, a copy of the presentation as well as a copy of the video will be available at knoxschools.org/budget in case you want to rewatch it later. So again, if you have questions or comments, we'll be glad to take any of those at this time. If not, okay.
Will any of the new programs that will be coming out in the budget, will we know about those ahead of time, or will that be next year?
Yes, so it's a good question. So the question is, for those that didn't hear, any of the new programs that are going to be approved in the budget, will the community know about those? Yes, so as soon as the budget's approved, then kind of the way that works internally is those departments that ask for those new programs or new positions, we would reach out back to them and say, here's what was approved. And at that point, they begin communicating out to their folks in the schools as well as the community. So yeah, there'll be awareness of that.
How can we improve current programs?
How can we approve current programs?
Yes, like for underserved schools, there particularly are programs that are after school
Okay, I thought you said, how can we approve them? You said improve them. Okay, yeah, I'm sorry. I think it's a good question. I don't know, Mr. Thomas, do you want to speak to that, or?
Thank you, Joe. Yeah, in terms of improving after-school programs, working with those providers to make sure that they are having similar materials that we're using, to teach in class. I know our curriculum and instruction folks have worked with the community groups, and as ESSER comes on, the funding there, which is separate from the general purpose budget, we're looking at, $178 million total, $114 million in ESSER 3, and so we're putting some programs. I know Dr. Riswick's here. Dr. Riswick's at the back there. He's our incoming superintendent, by the way, so I want to congratulate Dr. Riswick, and I know he'll do a fantastic job leading our school district. And also we have one of our board members, Miss Virginia Babb, here, who represents District 4, so thank you, Virginia, for being here. So again, there'll be more information there, but the ESSER funds are going to provide us with money to do some additional things like tutoring and with our students, and there's several other kinds of programs. I didn't bring my information to talk about that. I don't know, Dr. Riswick, if you want to say anything at this point. You don't have to, but but.
I think you summarized that well, and I think we do have that opportunity to do that. I think there's some new material.
But I think we're working closer, obviously, with our after-school programs than we have in the past. So again, we'll continue to do that and also strengthen that relationship with our after-school programs.
How are you guys building inflation into this budget?
So the question for those watching was, how are we building inflation into the budget? And so, Mr. McPherson, if you want to jump in on this too, feel free. So the things we saw the most of, which Joni spoke to there, was we saw a significant request for increases in educational materials and supplies, which of course are exposed to inflation as well. Oddly enough, we saw a significant increase in software, which we didn't anticipate being part of that. So that's one area that we saw a significant increase, and so that inflation did impact that. We also, in our bus transportation area, you can imagine the impact that additional fuel costs have had on bus contractors. And so we saw a significant amount there. And I think just stepping back and looking at not just the one-off investments, but if you look at the overall investment that the superintendent's recommending, which is the 4% increase in salaries and 8% for some targeted areas, those amounts, while not staying in step with inflation this current year, do go a long ways towards hopefully addressing some of the issues there. Don't want to get into a salary spiral. Yeah, that's a good point.
But with all the extra income you guys got, I think you should make sure that you put some aside for these unintended consequences of inflation. Because you're talking about 23, we're already at 40% inflation.
Yeah, and that's correct. And so, and the point made was, we need to be considering long-term impact as well, rather than near-term. And you're right, we do look at that. And so the careful balance we have to have there is how do we invest and carefully structure that investment and be strategic and recurring versus one-time cost. To your point, the more you put into a recurring item, the longer that's going to impact the district. So we do try to carefully manage that. Ron, do you want to?
So basically, every year we talk with Janice Cook, who's our school culture director, and Heather Willis, who manages the school counselors and social workers. So that's what we're talking about, the personnel that are out in the schools, social workers, school counselors that work with the teachers and the community to better serve those students. And we're working to lower those ratios over a multi-year plan. So bringing in more staff. Then the additional positions he mentioned, like the facilitators for the whole child liaison, whole child facilitator, those will work more on a system-wide basis to kind of coordinate, okay, we have this child, what can we do to help? What do we have within the district that we can help them with? So looking more on a whole child as opposed to just compartmentalize. I don't know if you want to add to that, John, at all?
You summarized it pretty well. I think if the question was around, social emotional learning and kind of what that is versus positions, I think you summarized that well. This investment really is not in programs, but more in the people who carry out the day-to-day supports of students. So.
And I would just say as a school board member, I mean, what I hear a lot of times is some of our schools have one counselor, especially at the elementary school level. Well, there could be a crisis going on and that counselor is not at that school. So then teachers and other people are done. So I think that's what we're trying to add, where there's actually truly staff at some of these schools to help. I mean, we're seeing more and more, it was even before COVID hit, but with COVID, we're seeing more mental and behavioral issues going on in the schools. And the teachers needing those supports within the schools to help. And so that's where I think you're seeing the money is. And we hear it from everybody. We hear it from parents, we hear it from teachers, administrators. While we want salaries up for everybody, they just actually need more personnel that are equipped and trained to help with a lot of those issues going on with children. So I think as a school board, I think we're very happy to see it. We continue to look to the state, and wish the state would fund it better. And sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, but I think we're trying to see sometimes how we can make up on a local level to get better ratios, because when you look sometimes at the schools, you have one counselor dealing with hundreds of kids, and they can't meet those needs or know those kids' real needs when they are spread that thin. So that's, I think, where we're really trying to help.
So this isn't data gathering for children.
And I think it's real, I'm speaking, I think much more about really putting people in there to one-on-one, I mean, not one-on-one, but that you don't have the counselors spread as thinly as they have been.
Would that go for teacher assistants who also help with IEPs and things like that? I know you mentioned that intervention was cut for kindergarten a couple of years ago. And personally, we're struggling with intervention in more than one area. And we were told that you're only allowed to get intervention in one area. And I'm wondering if staffing more equipped teachers will help the children get the help they need in all areas so that they're not so far behind once they finally master and got past that one area.
So, so just to repeat the question, it's, as I understood it, are we investing in assistance as well to help teachers carry out intervention? And then kind of a follow-up was, are there limits to the kind of intervention we can provide based on what you've heard? And so I may have misspoke when I said this earlier. The kindergarten intervention, while that revenue source did go away, we're continuing that initiative, so it's still in our budget. And so back to what Joni said about the investments, we have this current budget proposal includes a significant increase for educational assistance, a lot of which are involved in the intervention you're speaking of. And so I don't know how many total. I know we're absorbing about 40 probably from IDEA into the general purpose budget. How many new TA positions are we talking about?
So those are the special ed assistants we're adding. Those will deal with the children in the special ed area. So for regular ed intervention, I don't know, John, if you want to address that as far as how is that handled at the school level? Yeah, sorry.
So they are based on need at the school. So we do, as you may know, levels of assessment through like an Ames Web assessment to see where students fall out. So and then we get that specific based on what's required by the state. Sometimes it's a 30-minute or 45-minute additional time in that subject matter. Typically in the elementary, it's in reading, where we do that in math, the two areas that we do. So we have educational assistants
So when we say a school receives funding, what we actually mean by that is we allocate resources. Currently, we allocate positions through the staffing formula, and then the administrator at that school will then place those positions in where they think best. Whether obviously it's a factor of scheduling and some other things. So it's not necessarily like we just write a. I mean, it's a great question, but it's not like where we just write a check to a school and then the school then turns around and does their own thing. So the vast majority of resources at the school are people. And so when we talk about resources, that's, for the most part, that's what we're talking about, are teaching positions, assistant principals, counselors, social workers, and there's a staffing formula that we use to determine that based on the demographics of the school and the size of the school. Now, with respect to programs, that's when the principal, assistant, the administrators there will work with grade level directors. They'll work with curriculum specialists to determine what particular programs, if there are particular programs they want to implement at the school, then they would work with the grade level directors and the curriculum folks for that.
So whenever we receive emails saying like, congratulations, such and such school has been awarded such and such money to go towards this, that's through.
That sounds like, well, that would depend. Often schools will actually submit applications for grants, for a particular grant, and oh, thanks. Yeah, Mr. Thomas reminded me too. So also Title I, schools that are eligible will receive Title I funding. That's economically disadvantaged students. If there's a proportion of that school that reaches a certain level, they're eligible for the Title I funding. So that would be supplemental funding on top of the allocation from the general purpose budget.
But I will point out about that too. Sometimes you'll see like reward schools, things like that. There's no money tied to that. That is just you see some of these honors sometimes given to schools. There usually is not money that's attached to that. It's just kind of an honor that they reach some certain benchmarks.
Any other thoughts, comments, questions?
If not, then we'll conclude our meeting. I want to thank you again for being here, and if you have other questions, we'll stick around for a few minutes. So if you would want to come up and ask questions that you maybe didn't want to ask publicly, be glad to try to address those too. So thank you again for being here. Good night.